They underestimated you from the start, mistook your patience for weakness, your silence for surrender. They played their games, thinking you'd keep showing up, keep choosing peace over pride. But what they didn't see was that every excuse, every manipulation, every dismissive glance was adding fuel to something bigger. And when the moment came, you didn't just walk away quietly. You flipped the entire game. You shuffled their comfort into chaos, turned their certainty into confusion like cards tossed into a storm. They wanted control, closure, another chance to rewrite the story on their terms. But you didn't offer options. No more yes, no more no. Just one word that shattered the script. Boom! That was the sound of your clarity, your decision, your breakthrough. No rage, no revenge, just calm, focused action. Now, they're scrambling, not because you chased them, but because they finally saw what they lost. You weren't a piece on their board. You were the storm they never saw coming. And now, there's no going back. If this message hit home for you, hit that like button. Subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, and leave a comment with their names. There comes a moment when patience runs out and silence breaks, not with noise, but with undeniable force. You weren't just someone sitting quietly in the corner anymore. You became the storm that no one saw coming. You flipped the table that held all their lies, all their fake smiles, and all the games they played, and you lit the match that burned it all to ashes. It wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about reclaiming your dignity, your power, and your truth. The things they tried to steal from you for far too long. You'd been careful, measured, and giving for so long, hoping for change, hoping they'd finally see you for who you truly were. But when their deceit piled up, when excuses drowned your voice and loyalty turned into betrayal, something inside you snapped. That day, you weren't the quiet pawn they underestimated. You became the catalyst for chaos, the force that upended their comfortable illusion. You showed them that every lie has consequences, and you were ready to deliver yours. This wasn't a moment of anger. It was a moment of clarity. You realized you'd been playing by their rules far too long, and their game was rigged from the start. So, instead of begging for fairness or crying for respect, you rewrote the rules. You didn't need to explain yourself. Your actions spoke louder than any words could. And when the dust settled, they knew the table would never be the same. You gave them chance after chance, smile after smile, all the signs that said, "I'm here, I'm loyal, I want to believe in you." But they rewarded that with lies and half-truths, weaving a web of excuses that trapped you in frustration. For too long, you played by their rules, soft, forgiving, predictable. But inside, you were building strength, sharpening your resolve, ready for the moment when enough was truly enough. The moment you decided to stop playing nice wasn't an impulse. It was a revolution. You watched their comfort crumble as you exposed the cracks in their carefully constructed world. You disrupted their control, scattering their illusions like ash on the wind. You refused to be the scapegoat, the easy target, or the soft shoulder any longer. Your loyalty was never weakness. It was a weapon, and you finally wielded it. When you decided to fight back, the game changed completely. Suddenly, they were the ones scrambling, trying to understand how you went from meek to unbreakable. You didn't just burn their bridges, you turned the whole battlefield into a lesson they'd never forget. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival, and they were forced to witness the power of a soul set free. They always saw you as harmless, someone they could push around, manipulate, or discard when convenient. They never guessed you'd grow into a force they feared, the consequence of their own cruelty and neglect. When you stepped out of their shadow, the whole dynamic shifted. You stopped being the victim and became the threat, the reckoning they never anticipated. Becoming that threat wasn't about aggression. It was about self-respect and boundaries. It was about saying, I will no longer accept what you're willing to give. You stopped hiding your pain behind smiles and stopped accepting excuses that were nothing more than a mask for their selfishness. You owned your voice, your power, your silence, and in that ownership, you found strength beyond words. When they realized you weren't just going to stay quiet or compliant anymore, panic set in. They scrambled to contain what they'd unleashed, but the truth was clear. They had created a storm they couldn't control. You became a mirror reflecting all their flaws, and suddenly, their comfortable control slipped through their fingers. You weren't just a player. You were the game changer. Your kindness was never weakness. Your calm was never a sign that you'd accept anything less than respect. But they mistook your peace for permission to walk all over you, to use your patience as an invitation to exploit your heart. They saw you as soft, quiet, easy to ignore. They thought you'd always be there, loyal, silent, forgiving. But peace, when pushed too far, becomes something fierce. You tried to hold space for everyone, to be the shelter in the storm, the steady ground beneath their feet. But even the strongest shelters crumble under too many storms. When they realized you were no longer willing to carry their weight or absorb their cruelty, their world started to shake. The peace they took for granted transformed into a wall, cold, impenetrable, and unwavering. This wasn't about becoming cold-hearted. It was about survival, about protecting your soul from being trampled again and again. Your quiet strength turned into a silent warning. Peace is powerful, but it is not permission to be used. And when that boundary was crossed, you didn't shout, you didn't scream, you simply became the storm they never expected. When they demanded explanations, forgiveness, or just one more chance, you looked at them and saw something they never imagined. Your refusal to be a part of their story anymore. They wanted your yes or your no, but you didn't hand them a simple answer. Instead, you delivered a detonation, a quiet but earth-shaking revelation that nothing would ever be the same again. Your silence became louder than their demands. You showed them that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. You didn't need to justify your choices or beg for understanding. Your actions, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. That detonation was your reclaiming of self-respect, the sound of your soul breaking free from chains they never noticed. They wanted closure, but you gave them a lesson in consequence. They hoped for mercy, but you delivered clarity. They asked for answers, but you gave them the silence that screamed louder than words ever could. That moment was the pivot, the day you showed up not as a victim, but as a force that demanded respect, or else. Sometimes the loudest message isn't spoken, it's felt in the absence of noise. When you stopped responding, stopped pleading, stopped justifying yourself, your silence became a roaring storm in their ears. It was a silence filled with all the pain, disappointment, and strength they never bothered to acknowledge. And this silence, it broke through their defenses far more than any outburst ever could. You didn't need to yell to make your point. You didn't need to slam doors or curse their names. Your quiet refusal to engage spoke volumes about your worth and the respect they'd squandered. It was in that quiet space that they finally felt the weight of their own actions reflected back at them. Heavy, undeniable, and uncomfortable. And while they desperately searched for a crack in your silence to slip through, there was none. You had sealed yourself off, not out of bitterness, but out of love for your own peace. That silence wasn't empty. It was powerful, unbreakable, and the truth they'd been avoiding for so long. They didn't realize it at first, but your silence was the loudest wake-up call they'd ever get. They treated you like a pawn, a mere tool to be moved, sacrificed, or overlooked. But pawns aren't the ones who decide the fate of the game, and you were never just a piece on their board. You were the queen, the one who changed the entire flow of the game when they least expected it. When they thought they had you cornered, they failed to see your potential for strategy, for resilience, for power. You took control when they thought you had none. You didn't just play the game, you rewrote it. Their control shattered because they never imagined the piece they ignored could become the player who dictated the end. This wasn't just about winning, it was about reclaiming your narrative and proving to yourself that you are far more than what anyone has ever labeled you. They underestimated your strength, but now they saw the full force of a soul that refused to be small. You called checkmate on their manipulation, and you did it with grace and undeniable power. Control is a fragile illusion, especially when it's forced. They tried to cage your spirit, limit your voice, and clip your wings, all in the name of comfort and control. But what they failed to realize is that trying to suppress a fire only makes it burn hotter. The tighter they held the reins, the wilder you became. Their attempts to mold you into something manageable backfired spectacularly. Instead of bending, you broke free, not with noise or rage, but with a quiet intensity that left them scrambling. Their control was a house built on sand, and you were the earthquake they never saw coming. When they demanded obedience, you gave them upheaval. When they sought submission, you responded with liberation. They created a cage for you, but you turned it into the spark that set their world aflame. In trying to dominate your spirit, they unleashed chaos, a force that no one, not even them, could tame. When you finally stood your ground, they labeled you too much, too intense, too unyielding, too fierce. But the truth was they couldn't handle the enough you represented. Enough courage, enough boundaries, enough self-love to walk away from what wasn't serving you. They confused your strength for a threat because it disrupted their comfort. Your refusal to settle for less shattered their carefully maintained balance, and instead of facing their own shortcomings, they blamed you. Too much was their excuse for fear. Fear of what it meant to face a person who knew their worth and wouldn't apologize for it. You didn't become too much. You simply became enough. Enough to stop tolerating disrespect. Enough to say no when they expected yes. Enough to leave behind the toxicity they took for granted. They didn't fail you. They failed to see the power of a soul finally unleashed. There's something profoundly powerful about walking away without a fight, without a scene. You didn't need drama or revenge to make your point. Your departure was a statement in itself, a quiet, clean break that shattered their expectations and left them wondering what hit them. You showed that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the silence of leaving. The dignity of knowing when to stop fighting for someone who doesn't fight for you is a power they will never understand unless they've lost it. And losing you was their own doing, the natural consequence of their choices. Your exit wasn't a collapse. It was a rise from the ashes of betrayal, excuses, and lies. You left them with their own reflections, their own regrets, and the undeniable truth that you were stronger than they ever imagined, even without looking back. Loyalty is a gift, a rare and precious treasure. You gave it freely, with an open heart and a hopeful soul, expecting nothing but honesty and respect in return. Instead, they twisted that loyalty into a weapon against you, using it to keep you silent, to manipulate your trust, and to hide behind their own lies. But what they didn't see was that your loyalty was never a weakness. It was a weapon with a sharp edge. And when you finally chose to wield it for yourself, they were the ones who got cut. Their betrayal, their disrespect, and their deceit were the triggers that set your power in motion. In giving them loyalty, you gave them everything. And in choosing to walk away, you reclaimed that power, making them realize too late that the person they took for granted was the very person who could end the game with nothing but their own hands. The cruelest betrayal is the one where the victim asks for so little, just honesty, respect, and a place to belong. You gave them everything you had, quietly, hoping that maybe this time it would be different, but they chose to betray you anyway, proving that sometimes the deepest wounds come from the smallest asks. Their betrayal wasn't just about breaking promises. It was about breaking the trust of someone who never demanded the world, only a piece of it that was real and true. You stood in the storm, holding your ground, asking for nothing extravagant, just to be seen, to be valued. And yet, they turned away. But their betrayal didn't break you. It revealed your strength, the strength to keep standing, to keep loving yourself, and to know that what you deserved was far beyond what they could give. You are the one who walked away, not broken, but unshaken. Sometimes the most profound break is not just about walking away. It's about destroying the foundation that allowed the toxicity to grow. You didn't just burn a bridge to escape. You burned the entire blueprint of what once was. You erased the map they used to control you. This was no simple goodbye. It was a declaration that the past no longer held power over your future. You tore down the structures built on lies and excuses, leaving no path back to the chaos you refused to return to. Your freedom demanded a clean slate. In doing so, you freed yourself from the cycles of hurt and disappointment. You reclaimed your narrative and rebuilt it on your own terms, stronger, wiser, and untouchable. You didn't just walk away. You dismantled the whole story they tried to write for you. You offered comfort and refuge, a safe place for them to lean on. You were their shelter in the storm, their steady ground when everything else was shaky. But when that shelter was used as a doormat, when your kindness was mistaken for weakness, you became something else. The storm they never expected.